Today's episode is brought to you by the Tax Defense Group. Due to the global pandemic, the deadline to file your taxes for 2019 was pushed back to July 15, 2020. If you haven't filed for 19 yet, there's good news. The Tax Defense Group can e-file your taxes for you. The process is quick, and for millions of people, you'll get money back. Call the Tax Defense Group today at 800-850-7973 to get started. That number again is 800-850-7973, and you can visit them online at thetaxdefensegroup.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Junkie. Are you thinking about starting a business or a side hustle? Junkie offers website development, content writing, and SEO services for businesses. Call Junkie today at 805-587-7966, and you can visit them online at writerjunkie.com. Hi, welcome to the Great Western Podcast. This is Marcus, and I'm joined again by Jonny Arnett with the Jonny Arnett YouTube channel. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure as always, bro.
Let's get into this episode. So this is episode 2, and today we're talking about the Lakers versus Houston and the 86 conference finals, and the game was game 5. So, yeah, maybe if you wouldn't mind, maybe kind of setting it up a little bit.
Yeah, and so at this point, Boston Celtics have cruised through the Eastern Conference, and they're waiting for the winner of this series. The Lakers were seen as the favorites heading into this series, but they're now down in the series 3-1. And they're going up against Ralph Sampson, Hakeem Olajuwon, a really young and upcoming Houston Rockets team. And so back in Los Angeles, I think a lot of people are expecting this Lakers team to kind of pull this one out, push it to a game 6. And so that's kind of where we're picking up from.
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying too, like in terms of like being the favorites, I mean, the Lakers that year, they did win 62 games, which is the same number of games they won the year before. And they won the NBA Finals the year before. So, you know, and then even too from like individual accolade standpoint, I mean, Magic and Kareem were both first All-NBA team that year. So, I mean, they, you know, expectations of them winning a title that year were not, I mean, that wasn't like false hope. I mean, again, I mean, to even kind of put this in the ocean of how great the Lakers were in the 80s, I mean, this was the only time between 82 to 90 that they didn't get to the finals. So, I mean, you know, they were definitely there. And I mean, I guess after watching the game, I mean, what were your impressions of it? I mean,
I remember the first game we did in the episode, we were kind of a little tough on Kareem. He hadn't played too big hadn't played too well that game. But he showed up like a beast in this game. And so it's hard. You can't really blame anybody on the Lakers for not necessarily getting it done, because I think Magic had a good game. And when he was in, he was, you know, controlling the offense. He had 24 points, 13 assists, 5 rebounds on 53% shooting. Kareem had 26 points on 13 rebounds on 58% shooting. Kareem killed it on the boards, considering that he's down there with Hakeem Olajuwon and Ralph Sampson. So he killed on the boards. Kareem's 39 years old at this point. And heading into this game, Wilt Chamberlain actually criticized Kareem, talking about how he needs to step up his game. So Kareem had extra pressure coming into this game, but he played well. Magic played well. And again, the game went down to the wire, but those are a couple things that stand out. But, you know, this Rockets team was kind of just an amazing what-if team, because Ralph Sampson and Hakeem Olajuwon were both really young at this point. And there's certain aspects on both of those two bigs that about this game that I'm looking forward to getting into more, because they were such a great force and such a great tandem that people really forget, like, the optimism about this, you know, team and how we expected them to be perennial contenders late into the 80s and even into the 90s before Ralph Sampson's back problems, you know, started coming into play.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that you mentioned the thing about Kareem, because that was actually the first thing I wrote in my notes, were that Kareem was so much better in this game than he was in the 88 finals when we did with the Lakers versus the Pistons. I mean, Kareem looked good. I mean, it was weird. Like, you know, so the whole game, the Lakers are leading the game, like, the entire time. I mean, what was it? Like, the game was, so they were ahead with 37 seconds to go, and it was tied with 15 seconds to go. So basically, you have this veteran Lakers team with Kareem and Magic, both first All-NBA team. Olajuwon was second team. And here's a team, at this point had won multiple titles, had been there. It's so weird. Like, you look at it and you're just kind of like, what the heck was that? Like, I mean, like, if I was like a bettor at that time, like if I was there then, I mean, I feel like definitely before the series, I would have bet on the Lakers. And again, I mean, you even look too, like after this, they go on the next season, like they win 65 games, they win the title. The year after that, they win 62 games, and like, they win the final, or they win another championship. And, in subsequent matchings in the playoffs against like the Rockets, I mean, like, well, I guess in 90-91 they beat them. Gosh, there was a couple other too. I could try to remember what year it was, but like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't want to say like it's a fluke in any way to like demean what the Rockets accomplished in beating the Lakers in 5 games, but I mean, it kind of just comes off as a little bit of like a weird little blip in the 80s Lakers. Like, I don't know, in their playoff. Does that seem kind of like a little bit of a fair thing? Or I mean, do you feel like if that series was replayed, do you think the Lakers would have won it? Like, out of like 10 times, do you think they would have won it at least a few of the times or half the time?
I mean, maybe. Part of it was a matchups thing, and it's not like the Lakers didn't, disappoint at all throughout the 80s. In 1983, they were swept in the finals by the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, that 76ers team was incredible with Maurice Cheeks, Dr. J, and Moses Malone. And I think that 76ers team went 67-15. They only lost one game in the playoffs. So, I mean, you could argue that the Lakers were definitely outmatched, but they were still very, very talented. They got swept that year. And then in 1989 against the Pistons, they got swept that year. So the Lakers had their fair share of just getting blown out, really. But, with that being said, like, you got to give the Rockets credit because these guys came to play. Hakeem dominated the third quarter. As well as Kareem was playing, he dominated the third quarter. He scored 17 points in that quarter alone. He was hitting jump shots. He was, doing his typical Hakeem thing, just incredible footwork and such. I mean, if you want to see a fantastic game between bigs, just really talented, I think a lot of bigs and even younger bigs could go back and really enjoy this basketball because this just wasn't just big, tall guys rebounding and dunking. But like even Kareem had one point where he was driving to the basket. He gives like a little bit of a pump fake and then fades away and hits a jump shot. And it was just beautiful basketball between Ralph Sampson, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Kareem. But in the fourth quarter, the fight was crazy. That was super exciting. But at that point, Hakeem Olajuwon starts throwing punches and getting in a fight with future general manager of the Lakers, Mitch Kupchak. And once Hakeem's thrown out, Hakeem's got it's over 30 points at the point he's ejected. No, he's got 30 points and 7 rebounds at the time he's ejected. He's been the best player for the Rockets, their leading scorer up to that point. So, with just minutes left in the fourth quarter, you think, well, that's it. The Lakers have got this one in the bag at that point. And Ralph Sampson just takes over. He scores 12 of the final 15 points for the Rockets. And so you have to give this team credit because they had guys step up at the right times. You had Lloyd was hitting 3-pointers from deep. I was actually surprised at this game at how good the perimeter shooting was, considering it was, the mid-'80s. Because even though they, made a few threes, they made a lot of long 2-point shots too. So the perimeter game was really working for both teams too.
No, that's a very fair point. I mean, I don't know, like I kind of thought like in watching the game that, I mean, well, I guess, the scoreboard represents this too, but I mean, even though like Sampson and like Olajuwon were so good in the game, like I kind of feel like, I don't know, like, I mean, the Lakers in the fourth quarter, I mean, I feel like in the last moments, like they just made like a lot of like just bad mistakes, like missed free throws, turnovers, like they truly, I think, I mean, again, like, not demeaning the Rockets in this, but like I feel like in a lot of way, like the Lakers just like crapped the bed. Like I don't know what the heck happened to them. Like it was hard to believe that they had like the poise of like a championship like team when, I mean, they just, I don't know. Like, I mean, like to you, did it seem like there was a lot of like mistakes at the end of the game?
I mean, they had a lot of turnovers. The Rockets, I'm pretty sure, won the turnover battle because that was one thing I was noticing. Is you're right, they were making a lot of mistakes. I think part of that is the nature of the way the Lakers played in the Showtime era. Like, you're going to have nights where that happens because I've never seen a team who forces fast breaks as much as the '80s Lakers, and I'm not even saying that in a bad way. That's just their nature. The instant they get the rebound, they treated everything like a track meet. I mentioned that in the last video too, where they're immediately looking to sprint. And it worked really well when Magic was in, but at times where he wasn't in, because I believe he got in a little bit of foul trouble too. So when he wasn't in, that's when a lot of mistakes were being made. And so it doesn't surprise me just because of the nature of how they play in that transition basketball. You're going to get a lot of turnovers every once in a while. But they really did choke it towards the end. I believe they were up by like 14 points with like six minutes left in the third quarter. And with the energy in the Staples Center crowd, it just felt like a game they were going to win. I would have been shocked, watching that live, knowing that, if you had told me they were going to lose the game by the end, because it just felt like that was theirs for the taking.
So yeah, I mean, I guess if you wouldn't mind, maybe could you describe like the end of this game, in a similar way to the last game that we discussed? I mean, kind of just a really just weird end to it. I mean, at least for the last game, that one was just like, you could call that like malpractice. Like, that was malpractice on the basketball court, with the fact that people are on the court, the refs aren't clearing them out, even though like the Pistons theoretically had a chance to tie the game and send it to overtime. But this game, I mean, this game didn't feature that element, but I mean, just the end was just so funky. I don't know, like the Sampson shot at the end. Yeah, maybe if you wouldn't mind kind of just like, yeah, I guess talking a little bit about it.
Well, there's only a few minutes left when the fight happens, and again, you feel the feeling in the building is, this is the shifting moment, because like Lakers will take that trade every day of the week. Hakeem Olajuwon's ejected. Lakers lose Mitch Kupchak. Greatest trade-off in Lakers history. So you're expecting them to win the game. Jess Kersey, the referee, by the way, I just got to mention this real quick, was a total boss for getting in there and tackling Hakeem Olajuwon. Like, you got like not even 6 foot referee tackling this 7 foot angry Hakeem Olajuwon trying to defuse the situation. And so that was just nuts the way he got in there. But Sampson takes over. He scores 6 straight points for Houston, ties the game with less than 3 minutes left. Kareem hits a shot, continuing his great game, takes the lead. They come back down the court. Sampson ties it again. So it comes down to the one final play because the Lakers don't score. So there's 1 second left. Inbounds pass. Back in that time, when it said 1 second on the clock, that could mean 0.2 tenths of a second. That could mean a full second. That could mean 0.6 seconds. Like, you don't know exactly how much time is in that 1 second. And so he's just got to grab it. He's got to flick it. And when Sampson gets that inbounds pass, his body's not even facing the basket, and he just kind of contorts his body in such a way and just flicks it with his wrists, both hands, and bounces around and goes in. And it was crazy because Kareem didn't even contest it. Like, I've watched that play so many times now, and Kareem just watches him shoot that shot. It's almost as if he thought, there's no way this is going in. And then when it falls in, kind of the iconic image of Michael Cooper just on the ground with his like hands over his head, just like, what has happened? So just a crazy ending. Incredible shot by Ralph Sampson. And as I was watching it too, I was watching the press conference, Ralph Sampson talking about what happened in the game and all that, and just thinking, man, this guy's still such a young, great big, and this is the highlight of his career. Like, literally, this is the peak of his career, and he doesn't even know it because that was just an incredible moment. I say that as a general basketball fan, but as a Lakers fan, like, golly, I can only imagine how my dad was feeling in '86 watching that one.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, dude, you're right. Like, at that time, I'm trying to think of what would be like the equivalent to it. I mean, I guess it would be like, imagine, I don't know, the Warriors in like 2019 losing to, like, I don't know, like the Trailblazers in the conference finals. I mean, I guess that's what it would have been equivalent to, where it was like, I'm sure all of the money at the time was like, okay, we're definitely behind the Lakers. I mean, I don't even know where you'd look at the betting lines for that now, but I mean, like, I'm sure all of the money was behind the Lakers. Everyone thought they were going to win. I mean, I mean, I guess it's hard to know hindsight necessarily what people's opinions were in 1986 about who were the best players in that series, but I mean, I imagine most people probably would have said Magic and Kareem were the two best players in the series, like before the series happened, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure if the talking heads, like if Skip Bayless was around in '86 with his show back then, I mean, I'm sure probably more people than not would have said Kareem and Magic were the two best players in that series, and yet, I mean, dude, here they are losing in 5 games, and you raised a really interesting point. You said it earlier, just the idea of with the Lakers, the Showtime era. I mean, they had some like kind of like just weird little lapses of excellence, and it's just really bizarre. I mean, I guess some people would just assume it's like, oh, you're always gonna win, and sometimes it just doesn't happen. And it's really interesting too. Like you also you raised the prospect of like the Rockets, because I mean, like after this this playoffs, like after they beat the Lakers, I mean, they kind of had a little bit of like an interesting stretch after that. So like the next season they go like 42-40. Then after that, basically a bunch of 40-win seasons, 91, 92, 52, and I don't know. Like basically from then on, like I mean, I imagine too. Probably most people probably would have imagined that the Rockets would have won a title sooner than 94.
Yeah, I mean, based on this series and what the perception was, I mean, Ralph Sampson and Hakeem Olajuwon, because at the time, if you remember, I mean, we even saw it in the Last Dance documentary with Michael Jordan, is everybody was saying a wing player is not going to dominate the NBA. Like, you have to have a big man to win championships. And now we're seeing two big men for the Houston Rockets upsetting the Lakers. And you could, say, like, you would think that Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar were the two best players in the court. Some people would say that. Kareem was a little bit older, but he was playing well, definitely in that closing game. But it wasn't even just that, but that team was so deep. James Worthy is an underrated, amazing star in his own right. And another guy who played fantastic in this game was Michael Cooper. Everybody forgets Michael Cooper. He was the defensive player of the year, I believe, the following season. So just an awesome, like, ideal 3-and-D guy. And in this game, he scores 17 points, several three-pointers. He has 7 rebounds, 7 assists, and 5 steals. And so when you look at the stat sheet for the Lakers, you just think, well, they won this game, because so many of the guys showed up. But the Rockets just executed when it really mattered. And I think the sky was the limit from this point on. It's just such a bummer how Sampson's back just started to give out. I mean, one of the great what ifs, probably the greatest what if team of all time was the Rockets with Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Clyde Drexler, which almost happened because when they drafted Hakeem Olajuwon with the first overall pick, the Rockets were kind of thinking at the time, well, we don't need 2 big men. We've got our center of the future in Hakeem Olajuwon. And so Hakeem actually tells the story in a YouTube video, but they offered Ralph Sampson and the number 2, or the Blazers had an offer for the number 2 overall pick and Clyde Drexler for Ralph Sampson. If that trade had gone through, they probably would have taken the second pick to get Michael Jordan, because they wouldn't have needed Sam Bowie. So now you have Clyde Drexler, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Michael Jordan on the same team. So not only does that not happen, they keep Ralph Sampson, but then his back starts giving out like basically 2 years later. And so this team really, in several ways, could have been a championship team much sooner than 1994 when they got their first one.
Yeah, I mean, dude, that's a really interesting like what if team, man. And I mean, it's so interesting, man. Like sometimes in the NBA, I mean, like I guess that's when it comes to drafting, what makes it so difficult is that you just look at certain things and it's like who would have guessed, like especially that one. I mean, talk about losing out. I mean, we could definitely have lived in a scenario where the Rockets won 7 titles from the 80s to 2000.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, given the right, if that trade goes through, absolutely. Um,
Well, I mean, I feel like with the Rockets, I feel like they're kind of in a little bit of I don't know. I feel like as a team with like Elijah, I feel like they're kind of maybe they suffer a little bit in the same way that like the Pistons do, where it's kind of like being sandwiched in between these like historical teams that kind of like overshadows them. So like even like from the Lakers perspective, it's like the Lakers basically dominated like the Western Conference for the 80s, and then this was the one time, this is like the one year that they didn't do that in this long stretch of time. And the Rockets go on to lose to the Celtics, and then when they get back and they win a title, it's kind of in that that 2 year gap when Jordan didn't really play. And the Rockets, back to back titles. Obviously, they get recognition for it, but it's always kind of looked upon as the, oh yeah, those were those were like the interim titles. Those were the titles that you didn't play against the best player in the league. You kind of just won that, when the Bulls weren't at their best. And I mean, I'm not saying that that's necessarily like true, but I kind of feel like for like Elijah and the Rockets, I kind of feel like being situated where they were when they won, I feel like it kind of, these other teams kind of overshadowed them. I mean, certainly in the 80s, I mean, this Rockets team is, you don't, there's several other teams you think about first. I mean, obviously Lakers, Celtics, but then even the 76ers and the Pistons. I mean, you certainly think of those teams before you think of the Rockets, the 1 year they got to the finals.
yeah, for sure. I mean, as a YouTuber, it's kind of fun. I like teams like that people kind of overlook and don't realize because they're fun to talk about and bring to people's attention. But yeah, a lot of it was circumstantial because and just who they're surrounded with. Because you think about what's the best supporting cast that Hakeem Olajuwon had to him. Well, it was Ralph Sampson when both the bigs were young, and then Clyde Drexler, who was still a good player but a little bit past his prime. By the time he had Charles Barkley on his team, Charles was not the same player. Charles was pretty out of shape at that point. And so, what would Hakeem Olajuwon have been like? How many championships does he stack up if he had the help that Kareem had? If he's got James Worthy and Michael Cooper and Magic Johnson in his prime running the point, and it's just kind of it makes sense why they'd be overlooked because the Bulls were Michael Jordan led, especially in the late 90s. Just they had essentially a super team between Pippen, Jordan, and Rodman. And then the 80s itself, especially, the late 80s, was the era of super teams. The Pistons at one point had 4 All-Stars on their team. For the Celtics, you had Bird, McHale, and Parrish with Bill Walton coming off the bench. And the Lakers got 3 legitimate superstars with Worthy, Kareem, and Magic. And guys like Michael Cooper, who's a defensive player of the year, are just afterthoughts. That's a pretty nice afterthought to have. So yeah, it's really incredible. I think just that they were even able to pull this off and kind of ruined a little bit of the Lakers Celtics, rivalry. I don't think anybody's beating the '86 Celtics that year. That team was deep. Even if the Lakers, get through, they're probably losing to the Celtics that year. But yeah, it was a remarkable game, a remarkable series. I think it's crazy that Hakeem even got in a fight in that situation. Going back to the fight, though, what are you doing? Why are you fighting Mitch Kupchak with minutes left in the game? You're the leading scorer and you're in the Western Conference Finals. I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, no, dude, that's dude, it's a fascinating point, man. And you raised a really good point. We kind of talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but just the idea of, how certain series can impact people, but yeah, also just, who they played with. So if you go back to what you said earlier, if you had a dynamic duo of Hakeem and Michael Jordan for basically their whole career, if they had played together, if they won, like I said, if they won, let's say they even did the same feat, 6 titles that Michael did with Pippen. Dude, do we view Elijah higher all time? And I know he's pretty highly ranked, so it's not like people have him as the 49th best player or something like that. Like, I know he's pretty highly ranked, but I mean, would he move up though? Like, if those two did play together? And I mean, again, it kind of also goes to this idea too about like, who was winning titles with who. So like, obviously like a big knock against Kobe for, some people still have it too, where it's like, well, 3 of those titles were with Shaq. It's like, okay, fine, if you want to play that game, but like, I mean, what about the 2 when he didn't have Shaq? I mean, that's a pretty big accomplishment, right? Like, if you're gonna just throw away 3 titles, well, winning 2 with Gasol, I mean, doesn't that mean something then? And I don't know. With Olajuwon, I could definitely see, the argument where, I mean, who knows, if the cast was better and he won more titles, then maybe it would have been a totally different approach. But I mean, this is something that I know we talked about this the last time we were going to try to record, but just the idea of like, the Rockets is as a franchise, their best players and everything. I mean, so do you, in your mind, is there any way that Harden could surpass Olajuwon in terms of like Rockets greats? I mean, if Harden won 3 titles, could that put him over Olajuwon or no?
I mean, yeah, but I don't see that happening. I just
I don't either.
Yeah, I mean the way he plays and just kind of his natural style, I don't believe it's conducive to winning basketball. Now you can make the argument that they should have won, and in 2018, the series went to 7 games, and Chris Paul was out with a hamstring, so they might have been the champions that year, and that was in many ways their shot, but. I don't know. I think me and you might differ a little bit on just how great Hakeem Olajuwon was, but I do think if he had, the championships Kareem had, or at least close to it, oh yeah, heck yeah, he's moving up the list. I mean, because one thing that Hakeem has that ages very well is the beauty of his game. The mid-range jump shot, the incredible footwork, how skilled he was, how high IQ he was, his incredible defense, his incredible length. Like he's just seen as such a skilled big man that you could argue that certain guys like, oh, they wouldn't be as good today, which I think a lot of those times those arguments are weak, but nobody will try to make that argument against Hakeem Olajuwon. Like he would be so successful and maybe even more successful in today's NBA because of his skill set. And he got a couple quadruple doubles in the same month. He just filled up the stat sheet, to such a terrific extent. And all-time leader in block shots. Now, again, block shots weren't always, accounted for. I don't believe it was accounted for until like the late 1970s. But still, I mean, from the time we've been accumulating it, he's on top. And so, yeah, man, I have so much respect for Hakeem. And you have to remember, he was like, what was he, like 23 years old at this point? And going head-to-head with Kareem. I mean, he really ruined one of the greatest games of his career by, trying to take off Kupchak's head by the end of the game. But
something I want to mention too about Kareem is like, I mean, this was basically the last like Kareem being an excellent player year. So I mean, after this point, he never makes another All NBA team. And then even if you look at like points per game, like he drops off from 23 like that season. The next season 17, the year after that 14, and then his last season was 10. Like I mean, this was a great Kareem year. I mean again, it's crazy when you think about it, like a 38-year-old center. I mean, a 38-year-old player to make the first All NBA team and just be incredible. I mean. I think LeBron has the ability to do that, and I don't know the next time we're going to see something like that. A 38-year-old is so incredible, but yeah, I mean, in that game, I mean, it does kind of suck. I mean, you kind of raise the prospect, and I think from a historical standpoint, a lot of people they kind of view that as the year. It's like, oh man, like I remember watching the Showtime 30 for 30 that came. I forgot how many years ago it was made. But I remember they kind of talked about this season, and they just kind of just glanced right over it, or they were like, "Oh, they're talking about how great the Celtics were that year," and they're like, "Oh, and then the Lakers, they just fumbled the ball and they weren't able to make it to the finals that year." And that was like the entire cliff note of the Rockets going to the finals that year was basically, oh, the Lakers, they basically choked and that's why they weren't there. And that's kind of like how, like, I feel like that's kind of remembered from a historical standpoint is that was a really great Celtics team and the Lakers failed to get to the finals. But like, I mean, yeah, obviously the Rockets deserve a little bit more credit than that, than just being simply the afterthought to getting, losing to the Celtics. But yeah, I don't know. I just kind of thought it did suck though to not see Kareem like this one last great year of his to be able to go against the Celtics. I mean, I guess I don't know. In certain regard though, I mean, in the current NBA climate, like in some ways, for some reason, it's better to lose earlier than later. So like from the Lakers standpoint, I guess it's better to have lost one round earlier than having played the Celtics and lost to the Celtics then. So I don't know. I guess take that for what it's worth, I suppose.
Yeah, the Rockets definitely deserve more credit because, I mean, if you head into this Game 5 and say, what do the Lakers need to stay alive? You would say Kareem Abdul-Jabbar needs to have a big game. If you said that they won the rebounding battle when you're going up against Akeem Olajuwon or Ralph Sampson, you would think that would bode well. They need to do well on the fast break. They did well in the fast break. Michael Cooper plays well. They're shooting well from the perimeter. Magic Johnson has a great game, is facilitating. You would think that was a formula for them to win this game. And the Rockets still pulled it off. And I almost thought it was I mean, we talk about a lot of times like modern day, media and mainstream sports being a little unreasonable with their expectations sometimes. Like guys have to perform well every night, and if they have one game where they don't show up or, kind of come up small when it matters most, that they get, heavily criticized to an unfair extent. Well, I mean, how ridiculous were the expectations for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? The guy is in what year? Like he played 20 seasons, and this was like his fourth to last season. So he's in like year 16. By the time the playoffs started, because he was born in April. So by the time this game happened, he's 39. So he was 38 most of the season. He's 39 at this point in the series. And as a 39-year-old going up against Ralph Sampson and Akeem Olajuwon, Wilt Chamberlain is criticizing him before the game, saying he needs to step it up. And then he responds by putting up 26 and 13. Like, wow, we got to give a little love to Kareem, man. I feel like there's some ridiculous expectations to put onto an old man, but that's kind of just shows the beauty of his game. Like that he was so good for so long. It's why he's the all-time leading scorer. That when you're 7'2" and you have a hook shot and your release points, 11 feet in the air, like they just expect you to make it every time, And so yeah, it was a pleasure to watch this game again because even though they lost the series, it helped me, just appreciate Kareem that much more.
Yeah, no, I mean, you raise a really good point in that. I just want to mention something. Like, I think it was the YouTube channel SDC. I think he's the one who did it. But he talked about the Kareem and Wilt Chamberlain, the kind of beef that they had. And I think he mentioned that where, like Chamberlain, I think it was a series where like he called him out. And then, basically Kareem kind of bottled it all up. And then when he retired, he totally slammed Wilt. But, I mean, I think that's also a really interesting dynamic too, is that at this time, I actually, I saw an article the other day I wanted to share with you, but I forgot to share it. There was something where I forgot what news organization it was, but they did in like the year 1999, they did the top best players ever, according to them. And they pulled some, like sports writers and stuff. And dude, the list was so much different than you would think it was. Like, so number one was Michael, which again, this is like 1999. So, that's not a really that big of a surprise. But like, in the terms of who they thought were the best players, like Wilt was actually ranked higher than Kareem on that list. I forgot exactly again who published it, but like, they had Kareem as like the 7th best player ever. And like Oscar Robertson was ranked higher than Kareem, and like, I think it was really interesting, like that dynamic at that time, because I mean, I remember hearing things, or just if you listen to old broadcasts, I mean, the idea of Wilt being the best player of all time in the 80s even. I think that was like a thing that existed. I mean, maybe not everybody believed it, but like I don't think it was like it wasn't blasphemous to say the idea that like Wilt Chamberlain was the best player of all time in the 80s, especially at this point, even with Kareem doing what he did. And I mean, now I kind of think that the pendulum has definitely kind of swung against Wilt. Like, I think people now just kind of want to disattribute him as being this guy that just set all these records but didn't know how to win, which I think is totally ridiculous as well. But so at that time, yeah, I mean, that would have really made an interesting dynamic where here you have Wilt, who was a Laker, and then Kareem, another Laker, both play the same position, and they both played against each other, obviously, too. I mean, their timelines do kind of cross over a little bit in the league. And, you know, here you have this guy calling you out, and then you go on to lose the series in 5 games. So it's like, I wonder how that probably made Kareem feel. And, I mean, again, I mean, it would be interesting to read articles by, like, the OC Registrar or whoever, LA Times at that time, to kind of see what their opinions were about that.
Yeah.
And the fact that they lost.
It's funny, though, too. Again, it's like, picture, like, Vince Carter a few years ago. People being like, you know, if, like, Kobe a few years ago was like, Vince Carter's really got to step up his game. Like, Sacramento's not doing well, and I'm kind of disappointed in Vince Carter. And it's like, the heck, dude, he's like an old man. Why are you doing that? It's just kind of revealing of their beef a little bit. But it's funny you mentioned how, like, the perceptions have changed. There was a lot of people, and you talk to guys who are like in their 60s or 70s. There's a lot of people who still swear that Wilt Chamberlain's the greatest player of all time. But I think how the general fan interprets that has changed over time. And I think a big reason of that is statistics. Like the value of statistics, the value of longevity. It just means more than it used to the general fan. You know, there's a lot of people that, you know, believe LeBron's, you know, top 2 because of his stats, and Kareem's in there because of, you know, his stats. And I just don't think that was always the case. There wasn't, you know, with fans, you know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there wasn't like this obsession with statistics. There wasn't YouTube, you know, we didn't have Basketball Reference at our fingertips all the time. They were just going a little bit more by the eye test. And Wilt dominated the game to an extent on an individual one-on-one level like we hadn't seen. And even Michael Jordan, like by 1993, like when he won his, you know, 3rd championship, defeating the Phoenix Suns, people were already, and maybe that was a little bit premature, but people were already saying he's the greatest player of all time. And so it is really interesting to see how perception has changed and how we rank players and what we value. Personally, Wilt is in my top 2. It's MJ and it's Wilt in my top 2. And I get criticism from a lot of modern fans from that every once in a while, but I kind of lean a little bit more to who was the best when they were at their best. And yeah, Wilt was crazy. So if anybody could criticize Kareem, it's Wilt, although I felt like he was being a little bit unreasonable at the timing of his criticism.
Well, I think probably a lot of it, too, is also just the dynamic and the difference between the two people. You know, Wilt was an extrovert, you know, had a lot of, I mean, he's a person that I feel like even if I was 25 in 1974, like, I feel like I would have known who Wilt was. Like, Wilt was like such a big personality, and like he was a famous person and exuded a lot of charisma and things of that nature. Whereas Kareem, and I think that's one thing that's kind of hurt him, is that it's like, he's not really, I mean, he's brought up, you know, occasionally, it's like, oh, you know, he's a really good player. He's an all-time, you know, whatever number you want to put him at, 2 or 4 or whatever the sports media puts him at. But, you know, they don't really have a lot of like praiseworthy things about him other than they might say, oh, the skyhook. But, you know, I think it's probably because maybe his personality is a little prickly. And, I mean, you even see the way, too, that he interacts with the organization. I mean, the Lakers, like, he's not really, like, I don't know. I feel like, I mean, Kareem, I mean, to kind of put in perspective even from, like, a financial, like, situation, I mean, he had to sell his championship rings, like, a couple years ago. And I know he said he was donating it, but it's kind of like, I feel a little bad for Kareem, to be honest. Like, he was so great. But I think because of his personality, maybe the way he just rubbed people, like, he didn't really get to. I don't know. I feel like he probably could have had a better retirement. He could have probably been treated better. I think it's weird to me. Again, I'm not like a Kareem historian, but like post playing career, it's weird to me that like he wasn't more involved in the NBA, like as like a coach or GM or something of that nature. But yeah, man, I mean, it really is interesting in this game. Yeah, I mean, he played great. I mean, he was great, and it just wasn't enough.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough. And I mean, it's interesting too. Like, you look at the eras, and it's like, when you look at this game, it's like, it definitely seems like pre-modern era of basketball. But then, like with like Olajuwon winning in '94, it's kind of like, it feels so much closer to where we are now, because even though there are no players that are playing today that played in '94, there are people that have like played with players who played in '94. Like, I mean, LeBron played against players that were around in '94, and it seems a little bit closer to home. But I don't know, man. Well, hopefully the next game we review is this got to be a clear-cut victory by the Lakers. No shenanigans for them to win, and not a loss.
We'll have to talk about which one we want to look at and we want to tackle. There's a couple of good Western Conference games between the Lakers and the Nuggets, where it's just like all offense, all fast break. I look at the Denver Nuggets of the 80s, kind of like the Mike D'Antoni offense of the 80s, where it's just like, forget defense, we're going all offense, transition, shoot it as fast as you can. We've got several all-star scorers, and we're going to try to beat you with the strength of our offense. And so I was thinking maybe one of those games would be fun. Real quick with Kareem, I just want to get one more point out with Kareem, because I agree with what you're saying, but I wanted to make a point. So not only was it, I think, his personality, some people will even swear it has to do with like religious statements and even his name change, that plays a part in how he's been overlooked and that sort of thing. So there's a whole lot that goes into it, and maybe some things that we're not even touching on that much. But he was even overlooked in the Lakers organization. So you know how he got a statue outside of Staples Center? That was like 6 or 7 years ago that he got a statue. Like, wow. Why did it take so long? And it was funny because it was like literally a couple months before he got a statue, he publicly complained about it. Like, publicly had like voiced that like he doesn't get why he doesn't get more respect from the Lakers organization. So even within our own purple and gold franchise, this guy's been overlooked. And I think a lot of it has to do with his personality. Some of it's like the fact that like he's not even respected that much by modern players. Like, I wish somebody, a big, would take the time to incorporate the hook shot. But he isn't even involved with like modern players to the extent like Hakeem Olajuwon is, because he's just so different, And so, yeah, I'm glad we did this game and gave him a little bit more respect. I hope we do that in future videos, because he definitely deserves more than he gets on the regular.
Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, it's, you kind of almost feel like sorry for the guy in a certain respect, in the sense that, like what you're saying, I mean, he's a part of these all-time teams, and he's kind of like, his name's thrown out there, but yeah, I mean, just the disrespect from the organization, or just the fact that, like, I mean, I know that he's like, he writes, like, I forgot what show he was a writer on. It was something like random, like it was like some comedy show he was a writer for, and you're just like, what? Like, you wrote for some random TV show? I can't remember what it was, but and then too, I mean, you look at even like the dynamic with Magic. It's like, Magic's an incredibly wealthy guy. He ran the Lakers, even though he didn't do a good job running the Lakers, but he ran them for 2 years. And it's like, where was Kareem during this? Or where's Kareem on like, Spectrum Sports, like the local Lakers TV channel that has, well, I guess it's not only Lakers, but I mean, James Worthy's a staple on there. I mean, why isn't Robert Horry and Derek Fisher, I mean, they're regular contributors. Like, why isn't Kareem on that? And I don't know, man. I mean, there's probably a lot more about Kareem that I don't know about. Maybe things that he's done or said behind the scenes that really put people in a weird way. But you just kind of hate to see it from the Lakers' perspective because, like, there's a lot of weirdness that goes on with Jerry West. Like, there's something for people in the organization and Jerry West that don't get along because Jerry even said he wanted to come back in 2018, I believe. And like he was just totally told no, and that's why he went to the Clippers. So I don't know. Sometimes these old beefs, I don't know if they go back like a really long way, and people are just too stubborn to like get past them. But it's a little sad.
I picture with Kareem, like it just kind of shows the power of narrative because like he already has 6 MVPs, most of all. He has 6 NBA championships, tied with Michael Jordan. He's the all-time leading scorer, standing alone. He's one of the all-time leading rebounders. Like, he has all of this on his resume. But just add on a few things, like a killer will, competitive drive, will do anything it takes to win. Like, just certain ways we love to describe these players, He's so, versatile, determined, plays through injuries, that kind of stuff that doesn't show up on a stat sheet, but just narratives that we love to give, like the Kobes, the Jordans, and LeBrons, that kind of propel them to an extra level. Like Kareem he was who he was. And he just kind of puts up the stat sheet. And it just kind of shows the power of narratives, but sometimes you just wonder, like, is there too much power in those narratives? Like, is that making us kind of overlook, like, because Magic was Showtime, but for almost 20 years, like Kareem was like right there as like the leading scorer, It's to the tune of 6 MVPs, 6 championships, and just the model of consistency, and had probably the most unstoppable shot in NBA history, So anyway, we could go on forever about it.
And I mean, yeah, and he's one of the greatest old man players ever too. I mean, like what you were saying, I mean, he was phenomenal in college, phenomenal in high school. I mean, here's a guy at 38 years old, like, just incredible. And like I mentioned earlier, I mean, I know Karl Malone was great at that age, and I think LeBron, hopefully, will be good at that age. I mean, I don't know if the next time we're going to see a player like that. I mean, maybe the only person I could think of right now that potentially could be great at 38 is maybe Durant, but even then, it kind of depends on what he's going to look like after, he comes back. But I mean, dude, right now, I mean, how many All-Stars in the last All-Star game were over the age of, 33? Like, I mean, like a couple, but it was LeBron, Lowry, and Chris Paul. I don't think there was any others that I could think of on top of my head. Like, I mean, just to imagine being 38 and doing that. I don't even know if there was even any players. I had to even think about if there was even any players in this NBA season that were 38. I mean, I know Vince Carter was 41, but gosh, I don't even know if there was maybe, I think with Tyson Chandler, maybe. I know he was around. I know he played some games.
Up there.
I mean, we're talking about very, very few people. And people like, I mean, even Kyle Korver at this point, I mean, he's, like, obviously he's still good enough to be in the NBA, but I mean, he's not even what he was 4 years ago at this point. Anyways, Johnny, well, definitely, man. Thank you so much for doing this episode, man, and I look forward to doing the next episode.
Yeah, appreciate it, bro, and looking forward to talking about the Lakers and more Kareem on the next game.
We want to thank today's sponsors again, the Tax Defense Group and Rider Junkie. You can contact the Tax Defense Group at 800-850-7973, and Rider Junkie's phone number again was 805-587-7966.